Imagine this. It's the late 1930s to 40s. We just saw the rise of a totalitarian state in Germany and are in the midst of the Second World War. Pretty grim times. So grim in fact that you'd never expect someone to call those times the golden age of anything. But yet they were. Those were the times known as the golden age of propaganda. And one of the most effective mediums for distributing propaganda to the masses was through film. In this video, we're going to take a look at the history of propaganda in movies and how it is still used today to push political, environmental, and social ideals. But before we dive in, I just want to ask all of you to hit that subscribe button if you want to stay up to date on more great content. I post videos related to movies and the film industry every Sunday and would love to take you along for the ride. Okay, let's go. World War II was scary, not only because of the war and all of the horrific war crimes, but also because of all the shady stuff that went on behind the scenes, on both sides. Stuff that we still seem to be finding out about to this day. And one of those shady things was the use of movies to push political agendas and rally people around a certain mindset, thought process, or ideal. This is known as propaganda. Now, there are many forms of propaganda, such as print and radio, but films were the prime way to effectively distribute it to the masses in a short period of time. They were used to basically brainwash people, and the scary thing is that, for the most part, it seemed to work. When discussing the Second World War and propaganda, we also have to talk about one of the most infamous names related to it, Joseph Goebbels. Goebbels was the chief propagandist for the Nazi Party, and then the Reich Minister of Propaganda from 1933 to 1945. Now, I don't know about you, but chief propagandist or Minister of Propaganda aren't really titles I'd want on my resume, but that's what he did. He used propaganda to push topics like anti-Semitism, attacks on the Christian church, and also as an attempt to shape morale. He actually wrote movies like Der Führer to try and win over the public's perception of Adolf Hitler himself, and a movie called Life Goes On, which was never truly completed because it was still being filmed during the final days of the war. But it wasn't just Germany and the Axis that used propaganda and film to push the war effort forward. The Allies did it as well, especially in America. Just look at this list of American movies that are considered to be propaganda. During World War II, the American government realized that films were a powerful tool to promote the war and decided to work directly with Hollywood to make these films. Under FDR, the government decided to do it differently than that of Germany, where they had a single person in charge of propaganda. Instead, they set up two major institutions. The first was the Office of War Information, which regulated what information about the war was being released. And the second was the Bureau of Motion Pictures, which worked directly with Hollywood, setting up guidelines such as, will this picture help win the war? This is pretty crazy stuff. The government was basically filtering and deciding which movies to show the public in an effort to boost morale, get more people to enlist, and to quote-unquote win the war. We saw some really great movies come out from that time, with the likes of Charlie Chaplin's The Great Dictator being one of the most successful. The Great Dictator didn't start off as a propaganda film, but definitely ended up that way, making fun of Hitler and shedding light on the escalating violence and repression of Jews by the Nazis. But although propaganda in films was taken to the next level during the Second World War, it wasn't anything new by that time. We've already experienced another world war, which also used film as a medium for propaganda. And the earliest known propaganda film was actually a series of short films made during the Spanish-American War in 1898. But propaganda in film initially hit its stride in 1912 with what is considered to be the first fictional film in the world with a deliberate propagandistic message. It was called Independenta României, which was a 120-minute Romanian epic that was made to shift the perception of the Romanian public towards the acceptance of their involvement in what would become the First Balkan War. Fun fact about this movie, it had the highest budget of any Romanian film until 1970 when a movie called Michael the Brave came out, which was also supported by the Romanian communist regime for propagandistic purposes. As we were entering the era of the First World War, Russia's government experienced a revolution where the Bolsheviks took over the government. Vladimir Lenin, this guy, was a big fan of using propaganda in movies, but not as a method of rallying people around a cause, but instead as a way of teaching. Film was a great way to teach and get messages across in Russia during that time because of their low literacy rate. By the way, Russia did end up using propaganda for rallying people around certain causes in the long run. But okay, World War I is done and yada yada yada. We'll skip past the Second World War this time since I already talked about it, and I'm trying to break chronology and be all fancy in this video, and we arrive at the Vietnam and Cold Wars. This is a very interesting time for propaganda in film. We were in the midst of the Vietnam War with the Cold War also in full swing, and America needed to get its people on board with the Vietnam War going on and the possible war with Russia that was just looming on the horizon. And what better way was there to motivate people to support everything that was happening or could happen than to use the government's favorite propaganda machine, Hollywood. So that's exactly what they did. Hearts and Minds, as well as the fact that John Wayne not only starred in the Green Beret, but actually went to the president and told him he would like to star in it to help boost the Vietnam War effort, were just some of the movies made with propagandistic purposes in mind revolving around the Vietnam War. Propaganda in film during this time was interesting, especially because of the Cold War. Russia was communist, and America needed to spread the fear of communism throughout their population. They needed to make Russia seem like the bad guy, while also boosting morale of American citizens. Rocky IV, Invasion USA, The Red Menace, Red Dawn. You'd almost start to think that America was afraid of the color red. But red was Russia. They were the bad guy in America's eyes, and every American needed to be aware of this looming threat overseas. But okay, we finally arrive at modern times. And as you've probably noticed by now, a lot of propaganda in film to this point revolves around war and rallying people around a certain cause, usually a war effort. And while yes, we still see a lot of movies about war, they aren't the same as they used to be. War in modern movies is almost shedding a light on the brutality and consequences of war versus the glamour or showing how strong and powerful America is. Don't get me wrong though. We still see movies coming out that paint an image of the bad guy, less so Russia lately and more so Arabic countries. This was especially prevalent throughout the 2000s following 9/11 and the start of the Iraq War, with movies and documentaries like Iraq for Sale and Why We Fight. But during this time, we also saw something interesting, somewhat of a shift in mindset. We saw the film industry begin to break away from its norms of trying to support the government image and agenda in films, and saw more documentaries and movies taking an opposite stance. Most notably with Michael Moore's Fahrenheit 9/11, where he goes on to be critical of George W. Bush and the war in Iraq. Today, propaganda in movies released for wider audiences revolves around environmental causes first and foremost. We've seen a ton of movies that make the environment and how humans are destroying the environment the forefront of their messaging, and many times they are packaged in ways that makes it hard to notice. Interstellar and Elysium are two perfect examples of movies where the Earth is so far gone because of environmental destruction or overpopulation that humans have no choice but to move on to other means, whether it's another planet or some other megastructure. Sure, these movies are fun to watch and can be taken lightly, but the messaging is there. Earth will be destroyed unless we do something about it. WALL-E, a cute little robot left on planet Earth to pick up and compact garbage because humanity went too far and destroyed the planet. Avengers, where Thanos wanted to snap away half of the population of the universe so that all the planets could prosper since everyone was over-consuming. Food Inc. and Dominion are two really good examples of how film can be used in a propagandistic way for good and shedding light on the farming and food industries. These are just a few examples of modern propaganda that, in my opinion at least, are being used for good, rallying people around a cause that can help us in the future versus trying to trick people into believing something else. Are these quote-unquote good uses of propaganda 100% truthful? Probably not, but at least the good intention is there. But there is another side to the coin. With the rise of indie films and the lower barrier to entry, we've seen a lot of films and documentaries being used for negative reasons. From conspiracy theories around political parties, to anti-vaxxing, to spreading misinformation about the COVID-19 pandemic with movies like Plandemic, there's a whole subset of people these days making movies and films that can cause harm. This lower barrier to entry allows people to push their own beliefs and agendas without the need for government approval. We also have so many options for sharing these films through the internet today that it's almost impossible to stop misinformation from spreading. In the past, propaganda in films was either commissioned by or filtered through the government. The government of each country tried to rally its population around a certain cause. They tried to form an image of what they are and who the enemy was. Now, during a time where we see some of the biggest divides within countries, propaganda has taken a new form, a more indie form, but possibly a more dangerous form. Yes, freedom of speech is very important, but false information can be very harmful. These days, we don't think about propaganda in films too much because the general consensus is that it's a thing of the past. It doesn't exist anymore. It was a product of World War II or the Cold War or some other war. But propaganda in movies is alive and well. Whether it's used for good or bad, it's still being used. It's evolved from talking about war, at least in America, to now spreading false information about the current pandemic or certain political parties. Propaganda is a useful tool for rallying people around a certain cause because most people don't go on to fact check things that are being said in movies. They will either believe it or not. And it's also really easy to share. Thanks for watching. This video was extremely interesting to do the research for, and I feel like I learned a lot about propaganda during the process. There's also so much that I didn't cover in this video because it was meant to be a general overview of propaganda in films and its history. But who knows? Maybe I'll go deeper on certain eras of propaganda in film in the future. Let me know if you'd like to see that in the comments. If you like this video, don't forget to leave a like. And make sure to subscribe if you want to stay up to date on more great content related to movies and the film industry as a whole. And until next time, this was Dominic from FilmStack. Have a good one.